Hello and a warm welcome to the CNBC Africa Special Report. I'm Kukuletu Mfupi. Now, from the 7th to the 9th of May 2014, the West African nation of Nigeria played host to the 24th edition of the World Economic Forum on Africa. Over 1,000 delegates from across the continent and the globe gathered together to discuss strategies around forging inclusive growth and creating jobs. Now, to unpack that topic and so much more further, I'm joined in the studio today to discuss the outcomes and the relevance of this year's forum. I'm joined by Anthony Thunstrom, COO at KPMG Global Africa Practice, Carlman Moyo, Regional Director at DuPont Sub-Saharan Africa, and also joining us from our bureau in Lagos is William Olukoya. He's the Deputy Chief Executive of Symbion Power. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today. I must say, first of all, we're happy that you all returned safely and managed to attend the World Economic Forum quite safely following the security concerns that were there. But perhaps if we start with you, Carlman, I understand that you're the veteran here. You've attended WEF Africa for about 8 years in a row. This time around, was it different in Abuja?
Yeah, it was different. First time in Nigeria, first time in West Africa. And I think that's the right thing to do, to take it across the different countries of Africa. Nigeria has suddenly got a new importance with its GDP now surpassing that of South Africa, becoming the biggest economy in Africa. And it was a good opportunity that the business and governments could meet in Nigeria and discuss how to take Africa forward in the biggest economy on the continent.
So true. Well, William, let's come to you. You are situated in the largest economy on the continent, number one. Perhaps if we get your perspective on the matter of things, and I want us to unpack the topic here being forging inclusive growth as well as creating jobs. So often we throw around the numbers regarding economic growth on the continent, 5% for this year, as well as the 1 billion population that we have on the continent. But how does all of this dissect as well as impact the ordinary man on the street, whether he's in Abuja or in Johannesburg?
Yeah, I think it's very important to note, thanks very much, that first of all, the WEF this year was themed around 3 main pillars. The first pillar being how we can accelerate society's transformation, which I think is what you're trying to touch on. Primarily, we're looking at a continent that has about 200 million people aged between 19 and 24. In the next, by the year 2030, every other African will be living in the urban areas. So there's quite a significant amount of infrastructure challenges that have to be tackled between here and now and then. And it's very, very important that the WEF was able to primarily address a lot of those issues.
Well, we'll unpack all of those issues in a moment. To come to you, Anthony, to get your perspective on the matter, did small businesses and enterprise development play any feature on the list in Abuja?
I don't think it had a lot of formal attention, but I think it's about the life cycle of development across the continent. If we go back over the last 10, 20 years, a lot of Africa's economic growth, the GDP you spoke about, that has traditionally been generated on the back primarily of energy and natural resources, so mining, minerals, increasingly oil and gas. I think what we're really seeing now is a significant shift to infrastructure development, and then equally to basically everything that talks to consumer demand, both from a goods and services perspective. And I think really that shift to goods and services, that's really where there are a lot of opportunities typically created for smaller enterprises, people who can provide services really on the back of that larger scale development. So I think in a way it does play to a lot of what was spoken about and a lot of the big companies that were represented there.
I'm happy that you touched on the goods and services as well as the power and infrastructure, which we'll unpack into in a moment. But what we've noticed about the African continent is that it's regionally segregated. You've got ECOWAS on the west coast, SADC, as well as the East African community. Are we finding that a lot of government legislature is also mixing that or encouraging the regional development with regard to the development of the economies of those areas?
Look, I think certainly I think particularly East Africa, we're seeing some of the benefits now starting to come through. I think quite frankly, though, I don't think we've seen nearly enough. And I think where that manifests itself particularly is if you just take a look at the very limited extent of intra-Africa trade. Again, depending on exactly how that's measured, that's typically sitting at around 10-11% of total trade. It's not nearly enough. But at the same time, I think we have to be realistic. We deal particularly a lot with multinational investors. They are typically less concerned with regional integration. They typically are much more focused and look for specific opportunities in specific countries, and even more so these days around specific cities where urbanization has actually taken place, where a lot of that demand really lies in a concentrated manner. But then certainly from a longer term basis, regional integration is something that clearly is going to need more attention. There's been a lot of talk about it. Again, there was talk about it in Abuja, but frankly not enough action around it.
Not enough action around it. But Carlman, maybe you can provide your perspective on this matter. At DuPont, you take off Sub-Saharan Africa. Are we finding that what Anthony is saying is true, that investors are looking to get into a specific country and maybe not a region?
I think from our point of view, regional integration is very, very important because it'll just make the business environment much easier to deal with. For instance, we're a science company at DuPont, and a lot of what we do depends on the existence of a regulatory environment that is robust, that is uniform, so that if you get registration in one country, you should be able to use the same registration in the neighboring country, not start the process afresh. In agriculture, typically to run trials, you could take anything up to 3 years and sometimes even more before your product is registered. And that is a lot of time that is lost to bring in new technology into the areas or geographies that need it the most. I think that the issue of a common market is very, very important. And I have a feeling that the future is going to be where we will have technological integration, while governments are slow to pass policy. If you look at a country like Kenya, I'll just got some statistics there. 24% of Kenya's GDP is translated through the M-Pesa mobile platform. And last year, 5.7 billion clicks were made on Google, 40% more than Western Europe. So if our governments don't watch out, technology is going to take over and there will be a common marketplace anyway. So that is the way that we need to move. However, at the WEF, we had the president of Ghana really talking about the importance of regional integration, saying if we could move from the 10% to 80%, what would that mean for Africa in terms of our growth and our competitiveness if we were trading more with each other? So I think that it's very, very important. And at DuPont, we believe that a common market with common rules would make it better to overcome the challenges that Africa faces as it grows.
So true. William, I'd like to bring you into this part of the discussion. You're sitting in the #1 economy here on the African continent. How is Nigeria leveraging this position in order to increase regional integration with regard to ECOWAS?
Yeah, I actually have to echo what Carmen just mentioned, because obviously different countries have different resources. They're rich in different resources. As a result of that, you find that one country's resource may actually be able to benefit its neighbors. At Symbion, for example, we're currently developing a project out of southern Tanzania, where we're able to provide electricity using the inexpensive resource of natural gas, deposits that's currently available in southern Tanzania, to see how we can feed that into Mozambique, Malawi, and even potentially Rwanda. In Nigeria, for example, also, you find out that Nigeria is very, very rich in gas resources, and it's able to also feed through the West African gas pipeline the other countries along the West African coastline. In Ethiopia, where there is massive amounts of hydro, that's being developed currently to also begin to feed the actual sub-region. So you find out that given the level of massive infrastructure requirement across the continent, it becomes that much more important that each country's resource, which may be of benefit to other countries, are actually being deployed to ensure that countries work together, either directly between government to government, or also as a PPP model, which is the private-public partnership model.
Which of the two are you finding to be more popular, in particular in West Africa, where you have operations?
Where we have operations right now, we're beginning to see a lot more of direct governmental support, primarily because most of these policies will be driven out of government. Government will be the one to drive the required regulatory reform that allows cross-border transactions. And I think with government being able to provide that conducive environment for between countries, it becomes that much more easier for private industry to go in and actually solidify investments across that particular region.
Anthony, I'd like to bring you in here from your observations. It seems as though things are working in the western part of the continent, but with regard to other regions, what are you seeing? Are governments not dragging their feet in order to allow inter-African trade to take place?
I think a lot of it is around that regulatory space that we've just been talking about. And again, I think there are a lot of good intentions. There's been a lot of public talk around reforms. But in all honesty, it still is just practically on the ground, I think, too slow. I think, if you talk about inter-Africa trade, practically a lot of that it comes down to simple things like border posts, customs regulations, tax codes, and really making sure that those are aligned and that you don't have unnecessary bottlenecks in them. If you take a look at pretty much any of the significant border posts between African countries, they are not efficient by any stretch of the imagination. And really, it's just a simple thing. And it might sound simple, but obviously practically not that easy. Otherwise, it probably would have been done already. But just streamlining something like border controls and customs regulations, that in itself, I dare say, would really make a big difference to that degree of intra-Africa trade.
If you could give us a rating out of 10, where do we fare at the moment?
Again, it's going to vary slightly across the continent, but if I had to pick an average, it's going to sound fairly harsh, but probably a 3 or 3.5 out of 10. I don't think more than that.
3.5. Carlman, you're nodding your head in agreement there, so quite clearly this is something that you experience from your perspective as well.
No, absolutely. I agree with you. And even the earlier number that we've mentioned, that inter-trade between African countries is only at 11%. That just proves that there's just not enough that's happening. I think also sometimes if you can use the approach of a burning platform, i.e. for South Africa, in Nigeria, he's got the numbers. William just talked about the 200 million people. They got the numbers to have a significant amount of internal consumption that many other African countries don't have. And if for instance South Africa is gonna get the numbers, really working together with the rest of the SADC region would be helpful for the growth of South African companies.
And overall, that would also benefit the continent as a whole. Well, I take it the key to unlock that is no doubt infrastructure and power, which is something we will unpack just after the short ad break. But we'll be back with more on the 24th edition of the World Economic Forum on Africa when we return. Welcome back to the CNBC Africa Special Report, where we're taking a closer look at the outcomes of the 24th World Economic Forum on Africa, which took place in Abuja earlier this month. I wanted us to pick up on infrastructure as well as power development. William, you touched on it very briefly by giving us a highlight as to how governments are making it easy. But clearly, one indicator is that without infrastructure, we can't increase inter-African development trade. And in a very interesting discussion I had with a representative of the DBSA earlier on this week, they mentioned that a lot of times these projects need to be prepared, and preparation can take anything between 3 to 5 years. Now, obviously, that also lags the development of economic growth on the rest of the continent. Is that a challenge that you also meet up with?
Yes, absolutely, because it's very, very important as a second pillar of the WEF, which was deepening investment partnerships, to ensure that everybody works together in actually tackling these infrastructural challenges. And one of the things which we are seeing that's happening across the continent, for example, and I can speak, for example, on the recent effort by the U.S. government, is the introduction of Power Africa, wherein a lot of the challenges which we hitherto had experienced is now being accelerated. the key core around Power Africa as it relates to electricity is to ensure that we put electricity in about 20 million homes very, very quickly. And to do that, government and the private sector need to work hand in hand and cut all the red tape and cut across all the bureaucracy. So this partnership is very, very critical to allow us all collectively address the infrastructural challenges that we're seeing across Africa.
I'm happy you touched on that campaign, the Power Africa campaign by President Barack Obama. Anthony, from your perspective as well, in China, at WEF in Abuja, we had also Chinese representation from the Chinese Premier Li Keqiang, also once again emphasizing the point that they're willing to work with the continent. So it does seem as though if Africa can't do this alone, we certainly need help from the rest of the globe.
Absolutely, and I think just to unpack power, I mean, all the infrastructure across Africa is lagging in terms of demand. But I think we just understand how important power is. Quite frankly, you cannot set up an industrial base or manufacturing base in Africa without access to readily available, reliable, and relatively inexpensive by global standards power supplies. Really, if you're looking at inclusive growth, if you're looking at job creation, which again were very much central to the WEF themes this year, you need to have that industrial base, that manufacturing. So until you get power right, it's really, really difficult to allow the benefits of Africa's growth to trickle down to the populace as a whole. I think what we're also seeing, though, I mean, you mentioned the Chinese, and the Chinese pledged huge amounts of money, $30 billion plus in total. But I think what we're also starting to see is we're starting to see quite a lot of private capital come into Africa power generation projects. In Nigeria, we've just seen the privatization of their power industry. And in East Africa, we've started to actually see significant private equity money flow into big power projects in Uganda, for example. So I think it will be a combination of government funding, but equally it's becoming so attractive, and the business case for setting up reliable power in Africa is just so strong that even private money is starting to flow in that direction now.
Should the Sub-Saharan Africa region be looking at the West and the East as an example with regard to the privatization of power?
To be perfectly honest, I would have to take a fairly opportunistic view of that. I think Africa's power need is so urgent and so big. I wouldn't be overly fussy as to who's building my power plants. I think I'd probably have some concern in terms of greenhouse effects. In other words, is this clean power, is it dirty power? I'd be more concerned about that rather than actually who's funding it. But again, that's just, I guess, putting needs in front of perhaps people's individual principles or choices.
Well, on this side of the hemisphere, winter's creeping up, and we'd all like to be warm and not left in the dark. But you touched on something so poignant, and that's the involvement of business. And we saw that commitment coming through once again, Carlman, where the Dangote Group once again mentioned that they're looking to invest further and create more jobs on the African continent, together with Bharti Airtel. So it does seem as though infrastructure and power becomes the plumbing that we need in order to fix our economy. But for business to show such confidence in the rest of the continent, it no doubt is a positive indicator.
It is indeed. I think, there was a lot of talk about the Africa's next billion, Africa's next billion people. And when you think about that, a significant percentage of that, I think over 60% of those people are going to be young people. And young people are going to be will resonate with the issues that Anthony is talking about in terms of cleaner power. So I think that as we look at our energy mix, we need to really consider the total possibilities. And Africa needs to consider and see what else is available to it. Not everybody is going to be connected to the grid. We're going to have to look at off-grid options, and we're going to have to look at the natural resources that we have, how to harness those and ensure that they're additive to our energy mix. The wind power, hydro, and of course the sun that is so abundantly available, how to harness that effectively and to meet our energy needs. Now, with that in mind, we got to think about we are catering for a young population that is going to be more entrepreneurial. In as much as entrepreneurship was not discussed a lot at the WEF, but I think that the facts speak for themselves that SMEs across Africa generate about 58% of employment, and they contribute about 33% of the GDP. So SMEs are there, they're important. It's fashionable to always refer to the big investments, big announcements that get made. But I think the real action is really here at the smaller companies, where these people are employing a lot of people that contribute to GDP, but it's also, most of these are entrepreneurs who are young, and they're looking at sustainability issues in a more serious way.
So true there. And William, I'd like to get your perspective, even though you are speaking from a large corporate company's view, but from your perspective, are you working to enhance entrepreneurial development in the energy sphere in which you operate?
Yes, absolutely. And I actually echo what Carmen had said earlier, because it's the SMEs are becoming extremely relevant, within the African context. Africa, for example, is projected to grow at 5.2%, this year alone, and 5.2% is really, really huge in terms of a growth rate, especially when you compare that with what applies in Western Europe, or even in the United States of America. I'm sure they would love to have those large growth numbers. But having said that, just last year, there was about $42 billion of foreign direct investment that flowed into Africa. And you begin to wonder that if the continent is projected to achieve 5.2% growth, and can achieve that with the low level of electricity, of power and infrastructure that it has today, just how much of the continent's potential could be unleashed if there were better infrastructure, more access to power, either in the urban cities, where by 2035 there'll be about 50% of Africa's population, or even in the rural areas, where, for example, we need to develop a lot of the off-grid power solutions to actually energize a lot of those places. And that now the African youth population has become very, very innovative in developing itself, in becoming extremely entrepreneurial. And this is obviously a result of the technological advancements which have been made possible, particularly with the developments in the telecom sector. That has really opened up the whole continent, as to some extent provided a level playing field between the African continent as it used to be perceived, as well as the Western European and the American counterparts. So the ability to leverage on that is a way to ensure that the third pillar of the World Economic Forum, which is how can we redefine the growth model that currently exists within Africa, is going to be the way to go.
So certainly then it's time for us to get excited about this and perhaps highlight new opportunities here. Carlman, earlier on you touched on technology and innovation. So quite certainly this is a new pillar that we need to be looking at as well as enhancing the skills that our African people have within that sphere.
Certainly, as we talk about Africa's next billion, we have to think innovation, we have to think technology, because if we're going to meet the demands that are the demand for more energy, the demand for better food that is more affordable, that is in the right places, that is more nutritious, if we think about protection of the environment, if we think about sustainability, if we think about energy, all of these challenges that we face as Africa towards 2050 with the next billion will mean that science will have to play a significant role. We need to look at global science and make it a local wisdom, in a way that when we work with these SMEs on the ground, we can help them move from the artisan type to really become more competitive, so that they are more productive and they are more efficient in whatever they are producing. And I think that science is going to be the answer.
Science is the answer. And what's interesting is that we don't need to reinvent the wheel. If you look at a country like Rwanda, Anthony, no doubt managing to change its economy following the 1994 genocide to now, it's one of the most competitive economies on the continent. Is there anything that we can learn from them?
Absolutely. I think Rwanda remains an absolute standout case, not just for Africa, but quite frankly, globally. I don't think there's a better example of what happens when you bring in structured and well thought out policy reform, and equally certainty in terms of the direction of travel of that policy reform. Rwanda is a small country, it's got a population of roughly 12 million people, and yet if you take a look at the degree of investment attention that it's getting at the moment, it's totally disproportionate. And I think that almost serves as a case study for what the rest of Africa could be looking to copy.
Well, sounds like a fantastic story. Very quickly, will you be attending WEF Africa next year?
Absolutely.
Excited about it, Anthony?
Most definitely.
I haven't been, but hopefully I will be there. William, very quickly from your part, shall we be seeing you at WEF Africa next year?
Without a doubt.
Without a doubt. Well, it definitely sounds like exciting times. Well, we have come to an end of the CNBC Africa special broadcast. Thank you so much to my guests, Anthony Thunstrom from KPMG, Carlman Moyo from DuPont, as well as from our bureau in Lagos, William Olukoya from Symbion Power. Well, until next time, it's goodbye from myself and the team, and thank you for joining us.